Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining. I know there'll be more people, of course, coming in as we progress. For now, we'll just put up a little image of what you responded to when we asked what species you are studying. So you can see quite a lot of different species, and there's also a very distinct species. If you can name the species that we made the shape into, that's worth a bonus point. We'll just give it another 2 minutes or so before we get started, just as more people are coming in, which is great. And 1 more minute for those of you that are here already. Just 1 more minute for people to sign up. See from the picture that's up on the screen, there's kind of a nice assortment of languages there. If you can pick them out and read them, depending on your screen size. Okay, it's time to get started. Okay, so thanks to everyone for joining us, and also for the heads up advance for other people that are still coming in. Thanks to them as well. So today's webinar is specifically about tagging owls, how to attach the tags, transmitters, and it's not necessarily a very easy thing for those of you that have tried, and 3 people that we have with us today that'll speak have a lot of experience, and they've certainly gone through some trials and tribulations, and they've perfected it now, although I'm sure they might not agree to perfection, but it's pretty close to it. First speaker will be, well, actually, first we'll just do the housekeeping. There should be a note popping up for that. There we go. And of course, like many of these webinars, please ask lots of questions and put the questions in the chat or the Q&A. We'll have the questions answered at the end. There's a Q&A session after the speakers have finished. So yeah, any questions you come up with at any time, just enter them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll get to them at the end. We'll have some polls, the live polls that we'll conduct in between speakers. Everyone has been muted and everyone's cameras are off, partly to save band space, partly just to avoid any interruptions or anything like that. And we are recording the webinar, and one of the advantages of that is that at the end of this webinar, like in a few days from now, we'll be able to send everyone a link with a copy of this webinar so you can go through it at your leisure in case you missed a particular point or something like that. So speakers. First speaker is Geoff Holroyd. He's from the Beaver Hill Bird Observatory in Alberta. And you can kind of see that each of the speakers has a little bit of a specialty. So Geoff's going to focus in a little bit on Motus nanotags and northern saw-whet owls. After that, we'll have a short little break with a question poll coming up, and then there'll be Colleen Wisinski, and she'll focus on pinpoint GPS on burrowing owls. And then the third speaker is VTEC Jirinec, and he'll speak about pinpoint GPS VHF on barred owls. So we'll start out with Geoff, and Geoff actually made a great impression on me almost right off the bat. It's quite a while ago, but there was a conference, and as I said, he's in Alberta, but there was a conference in Europe on World Owl Conference, and he wanted to go to it. Unfortunately, at the time, his organization wouldn't pay. He said, "Hey, I'm paying my own way. I'm going anyways." So to me, that just showed incredible dedication and passion for what he does. And I know that many of you researchers come across it all the time. Tremendous passion and dedication. So it's fantastic. Geoff, do you want to start us out?
So Thank you for the introduction. As was mentioned, I'm going to talk to you about low-tech nanotags on Saw-whet owls, which I'm by no means an expert at. I came to it backwards, as you will see in my introduction. So my specific background is I worked for the Canadian Wildlife for 36 years, and among other things, conducted telemetry using mostly satellite, but some VHF telemetry with backpacks on a variety of raptors, falcons, and owls, as you can see. And then more recently was involved in putting geolocators on tree swallows and purple martins with leg harnesses. But when I started on this idea of putting nanotags on saw-whet owls, I immediately thought of backpacks, not leg harnesses. I looked at existing projects on Motus website, and it seemed like saw-whet projects were getting fewer hits, fewer detections than one might expect. Although I was spoiled in the past, as I say, by putting satellite transmitters on, so they don't require an earthbound station to pick up the signals. And I speculated that the owls as raptors have a bill that's meant for biting. And so the question was, could they be removing leg harness material, cutting through it and removing the tags, or could they be cutting through and removing the antennae, which has happened on burrowing owls when I first did burrowing owls in the 1990s. I forget what year I started that. The first ones, they actually chomped the antennae right off. So we had to put
Geoff,
on reinforced antennae. Yep.
Sorry, getting a message here that we're actually not seeing the slides progressing. Are you showing different slides, or are you still on the first one?
Oh, no, I'm progressing through them.
Okay, I can see number 3 is showing now, but it was
So
also
does it
stuck
show
on the first one.
Yep. Does it show nanotech concerns?
Now it is, yeah, but it was not moving before.
Okay. I'll just go. I was going to full screen myself, and I guess that disables so I'll go to the next. I'll go to the system. Okay, so those are a couple of considerations when I started this last year. So a little bit of background. I'm talking to you from central Alberta in Canada. We're on the edge of the Great Plains and the boreal forest. So saw-whet owls are nesting in our area and to the north and west predominantly, although there are some to the south, and certainly in the western US, there's lots. We have been banding saw-whets since 2002, and we typically catch between 200 and 500 per autumn with 2 months of effort. One of the things that I wanted to pass on to folks that are listening is how to fund a project. So this project was funded incidentally, or an accidental project. In the pandemic, we had to limit the number of people visiting our station. The public have a huge interest in seeing saw-whets up close. So we started having funded evenings, 20 people per evening, $25 a ticket, and it sells out. It's obviously become a big fundraiser for us. So in the spring of 2023, in our spring fundraiser, we asked if our donors would contribute towards purchasing some tags. And in fact, nobody donated part of a tag. 50 people donated $300 each, plus 2 larger donations, which resulted in over $18,000 in funding, going from a sort of an idea, let's see what would happen, to a major project. So that's when I had to dive into the harness techniques and figure out what I wanted to do with them. So the acknowledgements, really, the big acknowledgements are our 50 members who donated over $300 each, some significant donations in memory of Jim and Barb Beck, the Edmonton Nature Club. There were a number of individuals that helped with developing the technique I'm going to show you. And then the Motus station itself was a result of funding and volunteer activities. So basically, a backpack configuration, I suspect most of you are familiar with the idea of putting a transmitter on the back. There's a strap that goes in front of the wings and a strap that goes behind the wings, and there's a cross on the chest with, in this case, a sewn section. So one of the challenges with these tags is the holes are so small. So satellite transmitters have nice loops. You can sew on either side of the loop. And so the challenge here was to get the material through the tag, and I'll show you what we did. So first thing to consider would be reinforcing the antennae as it comes from low-tech. I did discuss with low-tech reinforcing them, and the question is, it seems like there's no data showing whether the owls are capable of bending or cutting the antennae or not. So I took the extra step of putting one layer of shrink wrap on. It was recommended to me recently to use marine adhesive shrink wrap. Dave Brinker and team were using this marine adhesive shrink wrap. So that's what I'm going to use the next time. And as you'll see from VTEC, he actually uses multiple layers, and I'm going to consider that in this year's projects. You have to cut a 32 centimeter length of Spectra tape to fit it on a Saw-whet owl, and this is the 1/10 of an inch, 2 millimeter Spectra tape that we used. And then mark it as I've shown there. So the markings I'll refer to, so there's a 8 centimeter mark, 14 centimeter, 20 and 27. And we initially colored them all black and then got confused as we put them on the bird, which was which. So the 8 and 14, 8 and 20 markers we color, and the 14, which becomes the top of the tag, is black, and then the 27 is black, and that just helps keep them sorted out. So the first thing to remember is turn on the tag, and I hate to admit it to an international audience, but our second tag, we forgot to turn it on. We were so worried about trying to get the sizing and the technique worked out. So the first thing to do is turn on the tag and record the tag number. We recorded the tag number, we didn't record the tag or turn it on. And much to my surprise, I actually, the low-tech activator does not pick up the signal. So fortunately in my garage left over from one of those earlier projects, I had a receiver. Otherwise we'd have been scrambling to find a receiver to pick up the signal to show the tags turned on. So that's an extra caution to folks that are wanting to initiate this. You need a receiver before you can actually be sure that the activator has activated the tag. So then we thread the tape through the upper end of the tag, and the key there came from Jerry Toll and his wife, who brought some dental floss tape activator. Shoot, I forgot the right title, but you can see it there, the thin blue line, and it allows you to pull the tape through this small hole as opposed to trying to thread it like a needle. And you center that on the number 14 marker and then glue it with super glue. So one caution here that took us a couple of times, if you put super glue, lazy glue near the Spectra material, it wicks it in very rapidly. You end up with way more glue than you want. So you should form a drop on the glue applicator and then touch the Spectra tape quickly and then pull it away. Otherwise it will wick right into the tape, and you don't want that. Then you've got the tag ready. I highly recommend getting a hood for owls. So I've seen various pictures of people using socks and material. One of the people helping with this is Helen Treffry and her husband Phil, and they are longtime falconers, and they cringe when they see that. As falconers, they use hoods. If you're familiar with falcon hoods, they have an enlarged bump where the eyes are. And so their concern was that any fabric that we're putting over birds risks contacting the eyes and possibly irritating or damaging the eyes. So I would recommend getting a hood. Fortunately, they had a huge variety of hoods, but unfortunately, these hoods were all of English origin, and that company doesn't manufacture them. But Jerry Toll worked with Mike's Falconry Supply and determined that a hood for a female merlin will fit on a Saw-whet owl size number 6 at Mike's Falconry Supply. I'm not getting a commission for advertising them, so if you have a different supplier, that's fine. And it possibly a large female might require hood number 7. When you're putting it, when you take it off, look at the inside and see if there's any moisture there at all. If there's moisture, that means it contacted the eye, and you're potentially irritating or damaging the eye. So that's a good check to make. You put the owl on its back. This picture doesn't have the hood on. It should have. You take the two ends of the spectra tape and wrap them over the shoulder and cross them on the chest. Okay, and then this I need to just explain. You can see these are the two spectra tapes coming across the chest. I've inserted a plastic backing. So this is just a piece of yogurt container or similar hard plastic that is underneath the spectra tape and on the chest of the bird. You cross it over and then you sew it. So it takes just 4 stitches, one in each corner of the cross. And Jane Latifi, our head biologist, is a retired, or not a retired, a past veterinary technician. And she spent 18 years using needle drivers and fabric to do sewing. So she very eloquently or very efficiently started sewing these using a needle driver and tweezers. So the tweezers hold the cross, the needle driver holds the needle, and she can very rapidly do that. I was doing it with my fingers. My fingers are old and clumsy and a little bit arthritic. So I highly recommend, if you can, get a needle driver and practice with tweezers and sewing. And then it's important to use unwaxed dental floss. If you use waxed dental floss, the super glue would not adhere to it. So that you can then sew the cross on the chest. And then the objective is to put this the strap on the back. So you roll the bird over, so it's now lying on its chest, bring the straps around, feed the longer of the two ends through the tag, and then sew this area here. So the next photo is sewing the area to the bottom right of that picture. So I know this looks cluttered. It's partly because my piece of plastic has part of the advertising from the yogurt container. But if you can ignore that, here's the tag. We've put our 2 pieces of tape at the back of through the hole in the back of the tab. And we cross them here. We hold those with small alligator clips. We then hold the fabric with the tweezers. We've got our curved needle and the curved needle and the needle driver with the dental floss. And we sew about 5 stitches on each side of the fabric, sewing it together, and then cut the remaining fabric off. So there's usually about 2 centimeters left on the one end of the fabric, spectra fabric that is wasted. So that measurement is fairly exacting for Saw-whets and doesn't waste much of the spectra unnecessarily. So at the end of that, you've got a happy owl, and with a bit of luck, you've got a happy researcher. One of the problems in doing these online is I'm hoping people are at least smiling. And because we've involved the public, invariably they want to see what's happening. Some of the sponsors want to come out and have an owl done the night they're there, so we schedule that. And we usually only allow about 30 seconds for pictures. We don't let people go on ad nauseum getting pictures. We do photograph every owl and send each of the sponsors a certificate. So this is part of the feedback to the public. This is my little certificate here. We actually embed the picture of their owl. Usually they're not in the picture, it's just a picture of their owl with all the details about their tag and the link to the modus.org if they want to try and find their tag. And then you sit back and let Modus Magic do its work. This is our new field station out of the Beaver Hill Bird Observatory, 2-story solar powered. You can see the solar panels here. And one of our volunteers found a used 80-foot tower. So it now is our communications tower, and you can see the Modus antennae on top. One of the added jobs was sending updates to our 50+ sponsors. And this has generated a lot of public interest. Obviously, these emails get spread around, and it's turned into a whole extra job of keeping up with the requests for information about our Modus project. And this is the data that we're getting back. So we've heard from about a quarter of our tags now, 12 out of the 48 that were put on active. The yellow lines are the spring records. The green lines are the fall records. So I'm quite happy with the 25% return rate in the first 6 months. The tags were set up to activate every 31 seconds with a projected lifespan of 2 years. So hopefully over the next seasons, we'll get far more detections than what are shown here. And that's it. Thank you for your interest. And I'd be interested to answer questions, or if you want to email me, my email is there. Feel free to email me after this.
Thanks,
Okay,
Geoff.
thank you.
That was great. I really liked the tips, the unwaxed dental floss. That would apply for tail mounts too. So that's good to know.
No, it's absolutely key.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll switch over now. And again, so all the questions you have for Geoff, please put them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll be able to go through those during the panel discussion at the end. Next up, we'll have Colleen Wisinski, and Colleen's with the San Diego Zoo, and she is studying, among many other things, she's tagging burrowing owls. That was our kind of I guess our logo or icon species for when we put the invitation out, all cute and cuddly. Most people think of it as, the general public probably thinks it's very cute and cuddly, but I think Colleen might have other things to say about that when you go to tag them. So we have a poll, and this one is about primary study topic. So you have 5 choices there. You can just pick one. We're not recording any names or anything like that, but we will show you what the results are. So we'll just make it real quick, maybe 30 seconds or so. Yes, I know betting's the thing now, but no betting on which of these is going to win. We're not doing that today. It's also really impressed, Geoff, with your observatory station. That's a nice looking building, really nice.
Yeah, we actually built that at the start of the pandemic. We had everything set to go. Turned out to be a perfect opportunity to tear down a building and put it up with no real use for it. And actually it was done over winter 2020, 2021. And I'm still blown away every time I go out there that we've managed to do that with the solar system on top. So it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, we have our results, and you can see that, and not too surprisingly, migration is up #1, and with home range also being quite popular. Given this is transmitters, that's kind of a bit more often the useful way. Okay, we're done with the poll, and I think now we are ready to hear from Colleen.
Thanks, Mike. So first, I want to acknowledge a few different people. The measurements for the burrowing owl harnesses that I use were developed by David Johnson from the Global Owl Project, so I want to make sure to give him credit. I also want to thank David and Alan Marsh from LowTech, who's on this call, for hands-on training for fitting harnesses. And we were really lucky to be able to partner with the Living Coast Discovery Center here in San Diego to use their live captive owls for training and practice. I really can't overstate the importance of being able to practice on live birds. I also want to thank my colleagues Jeff Linzer and Noel Ronan, who spent many, many hours in the field with me practicing and refining our skills together. And also my team over the years, because they helped with application of transmitters and kind of refining this whole process. And then lastly, just want to thank a number of different funding sources that have supported our work over the past 10 years. So a few considerations before transmitting any birds. All of the attachments should total less than 3% of the body weight of the bird. In the US, we can get special permission to go up to 5%, but we try to stick to the 3%. One way that we reduce the weight is by using air bands, which are numbers that are issued by the bird banding lab that don't have a physical band. And then for visual ID, we use a half ACRAFT band. And this alone saves 1 to 2 grams of weight on the owls. Initially, we used Teflon tape to make the harnesses. We switched to Spectra as soon as it was available from Bally Ribbon Mills. There are pros and cons to each. The Spectra, as Geoff alluded to, can absorb moisture and wick the super glue, which is great, but the moisture part may make it inappropriate for certain types of birds. But the Spectra is a lot lighter than Teflon, and it doesn't unravel, which is really important, and for birds with sharp beaks, and it takes the super glue well, as Geoff also talked about. The Teflon can unravel, so you have to be careful of this, and it is somewhat impervious to the super glue, so the glue can wear off over time, but it is waterproof, so it might be the right option in some situations. We also work to minimize the stress of the owls. Geoff talked about hooding the birds. We do use baby socks, but you can see there's a lot of space in the head. So I don't think that they're touching the eyes. We have not seen that as a problem, but I will, after talking with Geoff, we'll definitely look into trying to get dedicated hoods. We also usually do banding and transmittering during the day. And so we usually work inside our vehicle so that we can use the air conditioning. We don't tag when it's 115 degrees. That was just to demonstrate how hot it can be in the field sometimes. But the air conditioning is really helpful for minimizing stress and keeping everything cool. And it also eliminates the risk of a bird escaping while it's being harnessed. And then obviously, lastly, to keep talking to a minimum and make sure that people silence their cell phones. So Geoff Linzer and I received training back in 2014, and that was using the standard technique at the time that uses a jewelry crimp at the crisscross on the keel. We noticed some minor abrasions from using the crimps, and I honestly never felt very comfortable with using the crimps. So I really wanted to find a different solution. As an avid fiber artist, I realized that I could make use of the tubular nature of how both the Teflon and the Spectra ribbons are woven. And so I was able to develop a method that doesn't require a crimp or any sewing. And since 2016, we've used this technique without any harness failures on over 100 burrowing owls. I keep everything in a self-contained kit that I can use in both the lab and the field, which includes a template on the inside cover for creating the harnesses. I'll go into these in more detail, but some things I'm going to go over pretty quickly since this is recorded and you can always go back and check later. We have several pairs of scissors for both preparation of the harnesses and for application. The key is that they need to be very sharp. I've found that a wire stripper works well for cutting knots off of the harnesses after they've been removed or retrieved so that the transmitters can be reused. I keep extra harnesses inside a plastic bag to keep them clean. Super glue, it's amazing. It can get all over everything. The fumes can get all over everything. So be aware of that. We use index card strips to protect the feathers during the super glue process. And we have a variety of hemostats and needle drivers for clamping the harness during fitting and for tying knots really tightly. I use yarn needles and a small crochet hook for creating the keel sleeve in the harness that I'll go into detail on later. We keep super glue, usually 2 to 3 tubes in the kit. A pencil that helps for testing the fit. So a pencil should fit between the transmitter and the bird's body. That's generally a pretty good fit if the pencil can move easily but not fall out. We use Sharpies or other markers to mark the harness during prep and during application of the transmitter. Freight check is a really important tool. It helps to stiffen the material, and that's what I use to make the keel sleeve. And then I have a length of string that's basically a measurement jig for measuring out the spectra. So in the lab, I usually prepare about 10 harnesses at a time, and I string as many transmitters as I have usually. The first step is to measure and cut the lengths of spectra appropriate for the species. In this case, this diagram indicates the lengths and the markings for a burrowing owl. After measuring out and cutting the lengths of spectra, I mark them with a fine tip Sharpie according to the measurements on the template. So you can see those in the photographs. And then I think this is probably the most complicated part of this particular technique is to cut the the keel sleeve. So because the spectra and the Teflon are both flattened tubes, you can make use of that. It's essentially a hollow ribbon. And so here the blue lines in the photo represent the natural creases on the spectra. I use a hemostat to kind of open the tube and make new creases, which are depicted by the red dashed lines halfway between the two natural creases, and then make both of the cuts for that keel sleeve up to the natural crease. So this results in two slits that only go halfway across the ribbon and make this, this opening that I can make the sleeve with. And note that Spectra and Teflon are both really strong and hard to cut, so you have to hold them very taut against the scissors to make good cuts. And then the next step is to thread a yarn needle or the crochet hook into those open slits. And then I use the fray check to, I apply that to the whole sleeve and let it dry. And this basically creates a small tube. While the fray check is drying, I twist the ends of the harnesses so that they resemble shoelaces. And then I'll be able to string those through that keel sleeve. It's important to understand the mechanics of the harness before you're fitting it on the bird. So here I've colored the mock-ups to demonstrate what the different parts of the harness are doing. The harness should crisscross across the breast of the owl, so the left shoulder strap goes to the right hip and vice versa. Because one end of the harness goes through the other end, the two halves don't move independently, so it's a good idea to practice understanding how they move before you put them on the bird. When I string the harness onto the transmitter, I start with the front of the transmitter toward me, then insert the end without the keel sleeve, blue in the diagram, through the front tube going from right to left. Then I flip the transmitter so the back is toward me and thread the blue end through the keel sleeve. Next, I flip the transmitter so the bottom is up and the front is toward me, and then thread the end with the keel sleeve, which is red in the diagram, through the back tube going from right to left, and the other end through the same tube going left to right. This part is a little bit tricky since you have two pieces going in opposite directions. But once you get each end through the tube, then tie a knot so they can't pull out of the tube. And on the webinar recording, you can slow that part down to get a better feel for what's actually happening. With a transmitter that has loops on the back rather than a tube, you can follow the same steps, but it's a lot easier to thread the back loops and then again tie knots so that they can't back out through those loops. So this slide has just a really quick overview of the steps of actually applying the harness. And I've created a video that walks through the whole process. So I'm not going to go over all the steps in detail here. You can reach out to me to get the video. The next slide, I'm going to let the video clip speak for itself. So I'm skipping a few steps here because they're in the full video. But the next part of tying the knots can be one of the more complicated parts again with the tube configuration. It's pretty straightforward. You tie a square knot at the back under the antennae and then glue, which I'll talk about in a following slide. With the transmitters that have loops on the back, it's a little bit more complicated. You need to tie two square knots that are opposite each other. This is a lot more clear in the video. I use a Sharpie to mark where the knots are going to go once I've done the initial fitting on each bird. And hemostats come in really handy here for tying the knots to get them in the right spot, to get them really tight. And then again, I'll talk about gluing on the next slide. So while the knots are being tied, we're gluing. So we tie one half of the square knot, put glue on it, tie the second half of the square knot, apply the glue. and then cut the excess off, which is usually about 2 millimeters on either side. I have special glue scissors that are dedicated to this because they do get full of super glue, so they get kind of they get really dull really quickly. So we just have one set that's what we use that for, and replace it as needed. And then after you've cut the excess off, apply a little bit more glue to the knot, and then kind of mush it all together so that it creates a ball that doesn't have any sharp edges. And then one of the last steps for us is that we actually do trim the feathers from over the solar panel. This helps the transmitter just work better, at least until the bird molts. In this case, we also have dedicated scissors for this job so that they don't have any glue on them. They're just for trimming feathers. I pull as many feathers out from under the transmitter as I can, trim them as close to the transmitter as possible, being careful not to cut the owl, the harness, the antennae, and only trim body feathers, don't cut the tertials. And I usually do this 2 to 3 times because they have a lot of feathers. It's amazing how quickly they preen them back in. The very final step is to make sure that the transmitter fits well. So it's a kind of the Goldilocks rule. It should be not too tight and not too loose. Again, I use a pencil between the transmitter and the body of the bird to make sure that the fit is good. And one thing to note in this is that the shape of the bird can really affect the transmitter fit. So sometimes if you have, depending on what time of year you might capture the bird, if it's a female that might be carrying more weight at the time, depending on the year, it can really affect how the harness sits across the breast. So just be very careful of that and make sure that that's fitting properly before releasing the bird. And I'll end there. Thank you so much for listening today. Feel free to reach out to me to get the link to that full video, or just to, if you have any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Colleen. Really glad you mentioned about kind of explain the pros and the cons of Teflon versus Spectra. That comes up a fair bit. So good to hear that sort of analysis. And we'll put up another quiz or poll while we're just transitioning over. And you made that look pretty smooth, Colleen, the change from putting on that with an owl. How many times, the video you showed of you tagging the owl, how many times have you actually tagged the burrowing owl, like before that, obviously?
Oh gosh, definitely over 100 at this point.
Yeah.
So it's become, pretty smooth.
How many times do you think it took before you kind of get pretty comfortable with it?
I think probably about 10, and I had the good fortune of working with both Jeff Linzer and Noel Ronan in the fields to kind of work off of each other and have each other make sure that we thought that everything looked good. So it was definitely confidence building to not be doing it alone. That helped a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly always good to have some kind of a mentor, I guess, to work with when you're first starting out. And I think everyone can see the current webinar topic, or sorry, poll topic. This is about future webinars. I think many of you might know we did one last year. That was about attachments for passerines, small passerines. And so this year is focused on owls. And so perhaps, and in the future we'll do another one. We'll just be good to know from everyone out there which of these would be most interested. Of course, we're all certainly open to other ideas that you might have as well. And just a reminder, everyone, for questions. So for Colleen, please put those in the chat in the Q&A, and it's what we hear from after VTEC is finished, and we will get to the questions. Okay, so yeah, nice mix there of what we can do next. That's very helpful. So thanks everyone for that. Thanks again, Colleen. So next speaker is Vitek Jirinec. He's with the, let's see if I get this right, Integral Ecology Research Center in California. And I first met Vitek in a dark field in the backwoods of Louisiana. We were tagging woodcock that day and that night, I should say. And there's, I don't know how many of us, but a bunch. And unfortunately, there was everyone was in pairs to work as a team. But VTEC got kind of the short end of the stick and he was alone. So I felt real bad for him. Off we all went, kind of gathered back again in maybe an hour or two. And I thought, okay, poor VTEC, he's going to have nothing. He's just like wasted the last hour or whatever. I think my partner and I, maybe we got like 3 birds or something. VTEC walks back in the dark, shows up. He's got 2 birds in his pocket, 2 woodcock in his pocket, 2 woodcocks in his hand. I don't know how he did it. I don't know how he did it. None of us know how he did it. Anyways, if you need a guy to catch woodcock, he's your man. VTEC, go ahead.
Thank you very much. So first of all, does everyone see my screen, please, in full screen mode?
Yes, that's good. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Okay, so we're moving from small owls to a little bit bigger owls. And before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge my support from LSU, Louisiana State University, as well as my current employment at Integral Ecology Research Center. This is where most of this stuff has taken place. But definitely the biggest thanks go to Rob Biergar, who created the elastic wing/backpack harness that I'll be talking about. And then Marianne Clement, who told me about Rob's harness and then made some improvements to it. So thanks to those guys. Please check out their stuff if you're interested in owls in general. Okay, so I'll talk about some general considerations when tagging birds, including owls. I'll mention briefly a field adjustable leg loop harness that I've been using on smaller birds. And I think that could be used for owls, in addition to what Geoff and Colleen mentioned. And then the bulk of this will be spent on this field adjustable elastic wing harness that we were using on barred owls for the last 7 years or so. I'll talk about how you prep the tag, how we make the harness, the materials. I'll quickly mention how we catch our owls and how we put the tag on, and then end with some lessons learned. So I'll have a few slides that are a little bit busy. Again, this will be recorded, so please go back and check this out later. We are tagging birds, so that necessarily comes with catching and handling them, which potentially has some risks both to the birds and, in the case of raptors, clearly to the researchers. And so for that, I'd like to cite this Banner's Code of Ethics that's put on by North American Banning Council. It essentially says that bird welfare is paramount, and improper handling and tagging techniques can be bad for birds, and then in turn also bad for the data that you're trying to collect. So training is key. I think that's why everyone is here now. That's great, but more is always better. The North American Banning Council has a banner certification process. You can go and check them out. There are various workshops offered through observatories or at conferences, so that's always great. And if you can't attend any of those things, there are some free resources available online, like the NABC Raptor Banding Techniques Manual, that goes over things like handling techniques, capturing techniques, banding, and so on and so forth. So it's something that's useful. I would check it out. So briefly, I've been using this tag technique on this harness technique on various species, as well as on various tag types in Brazil, in North America. They work out very well. It's a leg loop harness using Teflon ribbon that potentially could be applicable to small owls as well. Again, in addition to what Geoff and Colleen mentioned, maybe you can check it out. I did use that on barred owls as well, just to test drive it, and it actually didn't work too well. I think those leg loop harnesses, at least on barring that, the leg loop harness didn't work too well on barred owls, so we started using this wing elastic harness from Rob and Marianne, and this is what it looks like on when it's ready to be deployed. And I'll briefly mention this, how we create this in a few slides down the line. So we are using an elastic harness. I think last year I was just saying that this is designed to stay on birds, not their entire life. Obviously, this will not last for that long. We're talking a few months to potentially 1 to 2 years. So yes, we're using elastic for the material. You can use various different types. The one that worked well for us is this lingerie elastic from Dritz. The only downside of this is that then you have to explain to your departmental business manager why you need lingerie elastic for a wildlife project, speaking from experience. Then we sew the elastic with a synthetic thread. And we're using these plastic shields to keep feathers away during fitting. So we're just using simple plastic board for that. Okay, so Marianne has made a great illustration of the whole process. So that's what we're seeing on the left-hand side. Please check it out later. It's essentially the whole recipe to how this is done. You will hopefully end up with this contraption that's ready to be deployed on a bird. I've worked very hard to make a sophisticated animation for how this is done. So wait for it. There it is. You just slip it over the bird's head, pull the wings through the sides, and then stitch it down to the right size to the bird. And I'll mention the steps down the line. My colleague, John Tenberg, has put on a few photos of how we actually make this harness, so please follow along. We cut up 2 pieces of the elastic, we cross them in the middle, and we make the stitch. The stitch that we're using looks like this. This is what it looks like from the front. This is how it looks like in the back. I'm sure that other stitches would work as well. We then tie the thread and put a little dab of glue to secure the knot. And then that whole thing, this sits in the front of the bird, so it doesn't, that little hard point that the glue creates doesn't really rub against the bird's skin. So that sits in the front. So that's how we make the harness itself. Then we thread it through the tag attachment points. Clearly, you want to make sure that your tag is actually compatible with this kind of harness. So please talk to your manufacturer, make sure it actually fits. Perhaps they may be, the manufacturer may be willing to alter the design to help you out. If not, you can perhaps get different width of this elastic. But keep in mind that the more narrow you make this, the easier it will be for the bird to eventually work through. We're also using dental floss threaders to get that stuff, the harness, through the tag attachment points. Then we thread the shields on, that's the front. This is the back. You want to make sure that the tag, the harness is about the equal length across all 4 points. This is now good to go, except we do add a few alligator clips just so it secures it is in place when you stretch it over the bird's head. You don't want it to pop off. Okay, so that's all done in the lab. When you go into the field, our method of capture is this tall mist net coupled with audio lures. So we have speaker on either side. I really like this these poles from Bat Conservation and Management because they're segmented. You can make this as tall or as short as you want. And it's very effective for aggressive forest raptors that don't like to come down very low. You get a bird in the net, and these are raptors, they can potentially hurt you. I do like to have some help. So one person generally holds the bird in the net, secures the talons, and then another person tries to disentangle it. When you do take it out, please, like as everyone else mentioned here, put a hood on your owl. You can get it commercially, as Geoff mentioned. Those tend to be a little expensive, so we make our own. And by we, I mean our colleague, John Tenberg, who actually left you some of these resources that he uses to create the hoods that we are using. And notice that their cloth or canvas, it is not super loose. So Geoff, I don't think to worry too much about that sticking to the bird's eyes because it does bulge out a little bit. And the big plus for the canvas is that you can easily wash it, which I think is important, especially now when avian influenza is going around. So we just wash everything after each use, after each bird, which may be difficult if you're getting hundreds of owls at your batting station. I understand that. So you would probably like to band the bird before tagging. So please use the right tools for the job. I really like to use these V-gel pliers that are effective at closing the lip on a lock-on band. So consider doing that. So now we're finally ready to deploy the tag. So we slip it over the bird's head, like I mentioned before. We pull the wings through the side, and then you can yank at the individual strands of the elastic to cinch it down to the appropriate size for the bird. It's always difficult to explain what's the right size, right? It comes down to a feel. I like to tell people that I just stick my index finger underneath the tag, so between the tag and the bird's body, and just feel light pressure. And you also want to make sure that that front cross here is below the bird's furcular hollow. Once you're happy with the fit, we just make 2 overhand knots on each end of the tag, so here and there, and then secure that knot with some super glue. And again, the plastic shield keeps it away from the bird's body. Then we just cut off the excess elastic, pull the shields out, and you're good to go. I do like to have a release video here just to show that we do put the bird on the ground before letting it go. I understand that some people like to just toss the bird up in the air. I think you should not do that, just in case the bird is dazed from being hooded, handled. So just put it on the ground. It's going to take off when it's ready. And another thing that this video shows is that reflective tape on the antenna. So it's useful for resighting of your tagged individual if it's something that you would like to do. Okay, lastly, some lessons learned. One is that some individuals just did not like to be tagged, and they really did a number on both the harness and the tag itself. So in some cases, birds actually pulled the antenna completely out. On one of my orders, Mike offered to use this more flexible, lighter antenna. That didn't work too well for the barred owls. This is what they did to it. They just frayed it completely. So if you have the option, please opt out for the more rigid antenna. And that's not a reason why we were reinforcing the tag just like that. In a couple of instances, the bird actually lost the tag before we wanted to lose it. And that's when the reflective tape on the tag can actually help, because you can hopefully you can increase your chances of finding your tag in the environment. This photo shows the reflective tag, the tape on the tag pretty far away in the forest. I think this is from about 100 meters away. So again, it is potentially useful recovering your devices at the end. And with that, I just have some thank yous to show, and I'm sure I can take some questions after. Thanks.
Thanks, VTEC. Yeah, and thanks also for the technical glitch in getting through that. Yeah, interesting about the video there with the release from the ground. I think that was a great idea. So yeah, I really thought of that before. And yeah, I won't comment on your animation, although I will say it made me feel better about my animations. If that. Okay, so we'll I think we have one more poll, and then we'll move on to our Q&A session. So I see there is a lot of questions here. There were a lot of questions here. Get that up again. Yeah, and so joining the speakers that we already have, we have Sean Walls, who briefly jumped in there while I was disconnected, and he's the director for the avian segment for Low-Tech, and he's had quite a bit of experience banding raptors. Not sure how much in the way of owls, but quite a large number of raptors. So he'll be able to help out on some of these questions as well. So let me just pull up the questions. Seems like questions were disconnected from before. And here we go. Okay, so our first question is from Richard Boardman, and this could be for any of you. Can we access printed copies of the details of the tape, attachment, etc.? So I know a little bit of that was in your presentations, but I guess perhaps you'd like to be emailed, or how would you like to be contacted?
Well, I can answer. I have a written description of my project. This is Geoff, but having watched VTEC and Colleen's presentations, I'm not sure I want to circulate it until I modify it and improve it with some of their techniques. So I'll be changing what I'm doing as a result of watching their 2 presentations.
And I would say I tried to make those schematics on as many of the slides as possible so that people can screenshot them or go back through to look at those. And then if you want the full video that I took of me putting a transmitter on, I think 2 seasons ago, reach out to me. I don't want to just give out the link, but I'm happy to give it to people if they reach out to me.
I'm in the same boat as Colleen. I'm happy to share even the PDFs of the presentation if people would like to do that. And I do have the video separately as well. And I think, Mike, feel free to put it in the webinar resources if you want to.
Okay, great. Yeah, and again, we are going to make a link available in a few days, so there's a lot of information there. And then, as we just heard, people are the presenters are happy to provide additional information. Next question. This one's for Geoff from Avery Bartels. How long do you anticipate the harness material to last? And it's a double question. And is it expected that it will fall off the bird around the end of the tag's lifespan or stay on in perpetuity?
Well, I don't know the lifespan of Spectra, but I suspect it's quite long, probably longer than the life of the bird. So these are being put on for life. I did have that discussion with the Canadian Banding Office before they would issue a permit to do this. All of the telemetry that I've done has been putting them on raptors that it will be permanent. The idea of putting in a cotton loop so that it would rot and fall off, raptor's just going to bite through it, or that's the risk of that happening. If they can bite through an antennae made of metal, they're going to bite through a bit of cotton. We're wasting our time. So I'm afraid these are on for life. They're not designed to fall off at all.
I'll throw out too with the burrowing owls. We do attempt to recapture the owls at a certain point because they're resident birds. We generally are keeping track of them. So if we can recapture them and remove the transmitter, we do. But that's not always possible.
And yeah, I mean, I can say that with buzzards, I tagged with Teflon ribbon rather than Spectra, but dead birds were handed in 25 years later, and the harness was still on them, so it definitely stays on. But there's also the risk that if you put in a weak link, that if it splits wrongly, you can end up with harming the birds. So we prefer a permanent.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And likewise, Colleen, I have tree-trapped burrowing owls, peregrine falcons, and prairie falcons where they've got transmitters that are giving battery voltage. We could see it failing. We retrapped a peregrine 4 years after we put it on. The battery was just a solar-powered battery that was just starting to fail, and the harness looked good on the bird. There was no feather wear or skin abrasion except for right on the back, right on the feather tract, underneath the transmitter, where presumably new growing feathers had been worn down by the transmitter, but otherwise it was in good shape.
Did you want to add anything, VTEC, from your perspective?
It all depends on your research question, right? If the life of your project is only several months, is worth considering some kind of a non-permanent attachment, like I think the elastic. That's all I would say.
Okay, very good. So next question is from Yanaka Chick, and this is a little bit answered already. Do you have a minimum weight for the owls you tagged, and was age a factor at all? So I know, Colleen, you had mentioned about 3% is kind of pretty straightforward. You can sometimes get extension up to 5%. But yeah, I don't know about if age came into anyone's considerations.
We've mostly focused on adults and adult males in particular, just because we are using them during the breeding season, and the females are incubating for a large part of the time, so the transmitters just don't work while they're underground. And so mostly it's been adult males. We're definitely interested in learning more about post-breeding dispersal of adults and just juvenile dispersal of juveniles. Not there yet in terms of the technology, so maybe in the future, but yeah, we're focusing mostly on adults.
And I would say the same. We're catching saw-whet owls on migration, so we're catching hatcher birds. They outnumber the adults, so I don't know the exact number of the 48 that we deployed there was more than half were on hatcher birds, but they're fully developed, they're full size, they're on migration. So it's not a case of trying to fit something to a nestling. Yeah.
We're only taking adult barred owls at this project, but I think, I don't want to speak too much for him, but Rob Biergaard, one of his reasons for using that elastic is that because he was tagging nestlings, barred owls, and so they were going to grow a little bit, and that's when that elastic, you know, comes in handy because it's more forgiving.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Next question is from Anne, and I will say again that the Q&A is still open. So if people still have other questions, they can still have them in there now. Next question is from Anne Nightingale, and this is directed to you, Geoff. Is there any question over the backpack affecting the flight of the Saw-whets?
Not that I'm aware of, but one of the problems with trapping owls at night like this and having them disperse, not having them resident like Colleen has, like our previous studies on burrowing owls in Canada, the birds disappear into the night and we have no data. So that's, and talking to other saw-whet owl researchers, the whole question of how do the transmitters write on the bird? Are they taking off the antennae? It all becomes a giant guessing game. We have no data. So one does what one can intuitively, but we just don't know until somebody starts retrapping some of these migrant owls and collecting more, giving us some feedback on the transmitters. We just don't know.
And again, this one's for Geoff, although I guess I know the answer this time, from Paz Irola. So had asked about the burst interval on the tags, and I believe that was 31 seconds you mentioned. Yeah.
Correct, yes, 31 seconds with a battery life then of hopefully 2 years.
For Colleen, Aaron Kuhlman would like to know what the size of your spectra tape is and how is the keel sleeve created?
So the size of the spectra tape is the 3/16 inch, which is 4 millimeters. The sleeve is created by making those two cuts to make the slits and then threading the needle or the crochet hook or whatever tool. I've used in the field, I've used one of the little stopper sticks from Starbucks in a pinch to thread something through those slits to make the hole. And then the fray check is the key to that because it kind of stiffens up the material and makes that tube.
And a good excuse to go to Starbucks.
If I could add to that, I wonder. If I can add to that, I wonder if it then would work on the 2 millimeter spectra, because I was intrigued with doing that. I would drop sewing in a minute if I could do what you've done, Colleen, by cutting into the spectra tube.
I think it could work. I think the key will be finding whatever material, probably a smaller needle would work to thread through those little slits. The hardest part, honestly, is making those cuts and not cutting too far. So it just requires really, really sharp scissors, and you have to pull the spectrum material really taut against the scissors and just make like really small cuts and have very, very sharp scissors. So I think it could work though.
Right. In terms of pulling it through, you might try the needle, the dental floss threader that I showed. That was Jerry Toll's addition to our project, and it was very slick.
Yeah, I like that too.
I'm certainly going to try cutting a sleeve like that. I really like. The other advantage is that it allows one to leave a slight length on the keel rather than having a cross. You can actually take advantage of the keel and have the straps come from the shoulder a bit on the keel and then cut away from it. So I like that improvement too.
Can't hear you, Sean.
Thank you. Yeah, I saw on one of the slides that you'd taken the spectra and narrowed it down and then glued it. You can actually cut that, and then it forms it can also almost form a needle of its own. So if you just glue it so it wicks in a bit. You have to have extra, But if you glue it so it wicks in and then cut it into a sharp point, then you can use the actual spectra to thread things through.
That's what I was doing before Jerry came up with the dental floss threader.
Yeah.
But the dental floss threader works really easily. You have to make sure you're not holding it, the antennae, of course, you're just holding the body of the nanotag, but it pulls through quite quickly, quite slick.
And also for anybody who's using Teflon rather than the spectra, I really don't think you'd have to be much more careful because of the unraveling you mentioned. You know, I don't think it would work with Teflon. So
I did do it with Teflon, but it was a lot. The fray check helps there too, but you really have to put a lot of super glue on it. We never had any problems with the crisscross part unraveling. We had problems with them getting the knots at the back and unraveling that.
Okay.
So yeah.
Colleen, I was wondering, is there a reason not to use a crimp at the end instead of the two knots that you're making? Because if you do crimp and you're using Teflon, that crimp prevents it from unraveling. So you just crimp it down, cut off the excess, maybe put a little glue at the end of the crimp. I suppose it will add some weight, but it might streamline things. Yeah.
It's a good point. It was all about the weight. The crimps were that it just was just a little bit too much. But we have been using mostly Spectra since about 2016. So I've really tying the knots in the Spectra is pretty quick, and those knots are incredibly light. I actually weighed one yesterday and it registered under a gram, so I was happy with that.
The one concern with crimps, especially with a larger bird, Karen Steenhoff initially put transmitters on prairie falcons by using crimps, and the birds wore the Teflon. This was Teflon days. Wore the Teflon against the crimp and actually cut through the Teflon, and they lost the transmitters. I mean, they recovered them on the ground, but the bird lost the transmitters. So I've stayed away from crimps. Even on burrowing owls, I never used crimps. I was concerned about the birds being able to repeatedly wear the material against the crimp and cut through it.
Okay, we have another question from Anne Nightingale. And again, we're talking about the harness. So she's concerned that neither Spectra nor Teflon stretches, and that previous guidance she had was to use materials that could accommodate changes in the bird's size and weight. Does anyone have concerns about the fit as the bird maybe grows or gains weight or loses weight?
No, other than allowing the degree of looseness that Vitek and Colleen mentioned. So I actually use my little finger on Saw-whet owl when I was doing peregrines or burrowing owls. I would use my index finger so that there's a bit of slack there, but it's not super loose. I can't give you the reference offhand. There was a paper, maybe the other speakers can remember, on eagles in captivity, and they tried putting the harnesses on snug and had much poorer results than having them with a finger looseness. So having a finger loose, I mean the webbing, the spectra or the spectra is lost in the bird's feathers, so it's not like it's on a hard surface flopping loose. It's held by the feathers too. So as long as you've got, whether it's a pencil, your little finger, your index finger, slack, there's a room there for the bird to get bigger if it had to.
Yeah, I guess I would. Oh, go ahead, John.
No, carry on, Colleen. Yeah, you go ahead.
I was just going to add that if you can get that crisscross to be on the keel, then that is kind of like the breast the breast muscle isn't generally going to get bigger than the width of the keel from the body. So that gives you a little bit of, like, if it's centered on there, that's going to be, there's enough wiggle room, and with the extra space that Geoff just mentioned, that if the breast muscle gets bigger or smaller, it's generally not going to get so much bigger that the harness is going to be too big for it.
Yeah, and I think it's just one of those things to re-stress. I know we had something at the beginning, but just to re-stress going to get experience from people who have been tagging birds and get that feel, because quite a lot of it is on that feel. And in my experience, tighter harnesses cause more problems than slightly loose harnesses. And I think it is also, as well as the Teflon or Spectra being in the feathers, I think the feathers hold the tag in the right place as well. So obviously it can't be too loose for sure, otherwise you get a wing cord or something. But go and get some experience from somebody who's fitting tags really.
I suppose the other thing to mention when you're doing that is see, especially on the chest, that the fabric, the tubing is worked through the feathers before you're testing its tightness. Because if it's lying on top of the feathers and the birds work it in, it's going to get even looser. So there's more slack there too.
Yeah, that's why I use a pencil. That seems to be perfect on a burrowing owl because they are super fluffy, and once they work the harness in, it seems to be the perfect fit with that pencil looseness. The other thing that I don't know if any of us mentioned that I don't want to not mention is that whether it's too tight or too loose, sometimes the birds will try, to get their foot up in that up into the harness, and that can be hugely problematic as well for some obvious reasons. But we did have one bird that injured himself by trying to remove the harness and got himself in the eye. So be careful of the fit from that perspective too, that if they can get a foot in there, or if it's too tight and it's really irritating and they want to get their foot in there, that can be problematic.
Great.
Another question here from Mr. Sami Ayadurai about his pinpoint 350 tags. If he could just could just rephrase that. It's not quite clear what the question is. So if you could just rephrase that, send it back to us, then we can.
I think I'm looking at it, Mike, and I think I can answer in that the connector loops. There have been problems in the past with the larger tags and the birds with the bigger strength, but we are now starting to use recessed loops. So I think they can, so that the birds can't actually get their bill into. Is that the
okay? I see. Yeah, I was reading a different word.
So yeah, I think we've got a solution to that now.
Great. And we have a question from Julia Caroline, and that's for, well, it could be for anyone, but I think VTEC probably best answer due to his experience in Brazil. How can I have partnership for a project with the aim of tagging hawks in Brazil? So I guess, how to start things up, how to get a partner, that kind of thing.
Well, I mean, that's a good question, right? Well, our project in Brazil has long roots going back decades, and so we had those partnerships already established. Clearly, having somebody on the ground at an institution in Brazil is key, and you just have to approach individual people that potentially might be interested in collaboration, right? So some kind of a raptor researcher, approach them directly. You're not going to be able to do research in places like Brazil without local buy-in. In Brazil, you couldn't even get a permit to do it unless it's sponsored by a local institution. So again, local partners are key, and you just have to approach individuals. That's my 2 cents.
If I could add to that, there are organizations, particularly I'm thinking of Earthwatch, which takes on projects. Individuals sign up to be volunteers with Earthwatch, and they donate the funding for the whole project through Earthwatch, so that you get they may or may not be experienced volunteer assistants, but they fund their travel, they fund the project. I know a geography professor who ran projects at Churchill and in Yukon using Earthwatch volunteers, and we've used a similar approach with the bird observatory. So I've taken volunteers to Guatemala. They donate the funding to the bird observatory, they get a tax receipt, and then that funding pays for the project. And as VTEC mentioned, we worked with Fundaco in Guatemala. They arranged a lot of the local logistics, but we still paid for everything. In fact, I put a surcharge on everyone's donation, so we made a cash donation to Fundaco when we did that work. So if you can build a partnership with a nonprofit, they can offer a tax receipt to their volunteers as well as the personnel to actually do the project, so long as you have the facilities to arrange the logistics, not necessarily pay for them, but arrange the logistics. Then people are happy to spend We had 2-week stints in Guatemala. They're happy to spend their 2-week holiday doing something useful, and they have the funding to be able to pay for it. And they get a tax receipt, which in Canada means you, after the first $200, you get 50% of the donation back in income tax savings. So it's pretty significant financial incentive for the volunteers too.
Great. So yeah, I think that this was a wonderful webinar. The way it was really neat to see you kind of go back and forth to each other and basically even learning from each other as we went through the webinar. That's fantastic. And I can just imagine that the audience experienced the same thing. So a lot of benefit for everyone. It kind of just reinforces to me how valuable webinars, conferences are, that kind of thing. Just getting together, talking, and then things come up that you maybe didn't even think about, or oh wow, I could do that. So that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone for, of course, thank our speakers first and foremost, and thank everyone else for attending. That was, I hope you enjoyed it, and we'd certainly like to hear back from you as to your thoughts. We will send out in addition to the link to the recording of the webinar, we'll send out a questionnaire. So please, any thoughts you have, ideas, pros, cons, things you liked, didn't like, please let us know all those things. That would be great. And yeah, we can leave it at that. So thanks again, VTEC, Colleen, and Geoff, and Sean. So thanks again for that. Really appreciate what you put together there, and just letting everyone know what you've learned through the years.
Thank you, Low-Tech, for making the arrangements, and Birha for coordinating the three of us and arranging the whole webinar process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you.
Cheers. Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.